human technological progress and advancement lie at the intersection of industries and sectors. And I think Frank and I have just created a new intersection, right? So this is the first quantum space play that exists, certainly in the public markets, and I would argue anywhere, at least in the commercial sector. It is the first ground and space QKD, quantum key distribution, and quantum networking play.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. The president and CEO of IonQ, that's a quantum computing company, he's saying that the acquisition of Capella Space is really just the beginning of an unprecedented quantum ecosystem in orbit and on Earth that is going to be very, very secure. In this week's episode, we have Niccolo de Masi, IonQ's president and CEO, and the CEO of Capella Space, Frank Backes, to explain what is driving this $318 million stock deal. It's just the latest in a string of purchases that IonQ has either announced or closed in the roughly 80 days since de Masi took the helm. And if you're into pop culture, yes, this is that Niccolo de Masi. He led the mobile gaming platform Glu Mobile and drove the development of titles such as Kim Kardashian Hollywood and Nicki Minaj The Empire before it was sold. 4 years ago, Electronic Arts acquired Glu Mobile for $2.1 billion. Don't let the pop star selfies out there on the internet fool you. De Masi knows business. He has taken a number of privately held companies public, and it should be noted that he was behind the IonQ IPO, which made it the first quantum company to be listed on a stock exchange. Now, on the other side of the Capella acquisition deal is Frank Backes. He is well known in the space community, especially in government and defense, and that's because he has been working the business side of this sector for decades. And just to remind everyone, Capella Space provides Earth observation products derived from synthetic aperture radar, which can see through clouds. It's powerful. So it's no surprise Capella's customers include the intelligence and defense communities that are here in the United States and also a number of foreign allies. But first, we're going to have a short conversation with Hector Falcon from the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center on the latest space threats. Here's our conversation. Hey, Hector. Thank you so much for making the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Laura. Glad to be here.
Now, before we get into the latest from you and the Space ISAC Watch Center, please take a moment and introduce yourself. Hector?
Thank you very much, Laura. I'm Hector Falcon, the Space ISAC Watch Center Director. Here at the Space ISAC, there's plenty to do with regards to collective defense, and thanks to the global collaborative community that we have of both partners and members, space companies across the globe, we can really get after it with regards to understanding what it means to kind of look at incidents, threats, and vulnerabilities.
Thank you so much. Now, really, this past weekend, the Earth caught a real break, right? The gods or goddesses that govern the forces we know as orbital mechanics saw fit to spare the populated parts of Earth from being hit by 495 kilograms of ruggedized Soviet-era space technology. I'm talking about Cosmos 482, an exploration spacecraft that the Soviets meant to send to Venus in 1972. Now, the backstory is that during the launch of Cosmos 482, something went wrong with the Soyuz rocket. The scientific part of Cosmos 482 split off from the lander and continued the journey to Venus, where it burned up in the mostly carbon dioxide atmosphere. But the lander, it got stuck in a really weird orbit around Earth. So now, 53 years later, the Earth's atmospheric drag and gravity pulled the lander back down, and it crashed into the Indian Ocean on Saturday morning. And the reason it didn't burn up is because it was engineered and constructed with materials, including titanium, to shield the scientific payload from the extremes of Venus's atmosphere. The carbon dioxide atmosphere that makes up Venus, it's roughly 100 times more dense than that of Earth. So there was no way this spacecraft was going to burn up on its way down to our planet's surface. And that, my friend, is really scary. But that's not all, is it? Right? I mean, man-made stuff, that's not like the controlled, Varda capsule or the SpaceX Dragon capsule. Just this man-made stuff that we've launched and is broken off or died or become derelict. I mean, it's falling back to Earth, some of it, and actually reaching the surface. Hector, tell us what you found.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And great question and great recap on that actual Cosmos 482 actual payload reentry. So when we started taking a look at it here through the Space ISAC, we identified that not only did it re-enter on or about 1:54 Eastern Standard Time, but there was no visual record of this actual reentry across the atmosphere. And that included the fact that it did come in, as you identified, within the Indian Ocean, just west of Jakarta, Indonesia. But also of note is the fact that that is just but one of several different reentries of actual quote unquote space junk or items of debris that are out there on orbit. In particular, just in the first quarter of 2025, there were 3 reentries, but only one of those was actually had irrefutable understanding and capture of debris re-entering our environment. In this case, it was seen streaking across the German skies, and it landed in the Polish city of Poznan. So that's interesting to identify. And before that, there was actually a metal ring that returned back to a small canyon village during also the first quarter of 2025, about 1,500 pounds worth of metal. Luckily, didn't hit anyone, but when we think about the actual reentry kind of numerics and metrics, we're averaging anywhere from 1 to 3 different reentries of payloads and or debris per quarter. As contrasted in 2024, those numbers were slightly lower. And as we take a look at that, it's quite the daunting task because there's over 18,000 pieces of debris on orbit. So imagine how those are starting to get stacked up, and it could be a very busy 2025 thinking about those quarterly contrasts.
But not just anything can, make it back down to the Earth's surface. I mean, first of all, it's a piece of something, right? It enters into the atmosphere, and we expect space debris, some of it to re-enter the atmosphere. We expect it to burn up, and we expect all kinds of things to burn up. In fact, we do designs of space payloads designed specifically so that if they get caught up in the drag of the atmosphere, that they do burn up, right? That they don't make it back to the surface. But these things are not burning up. So, how do we manage that? I mean, are we just lucky that it hasn't hit anybody? I mean, the thing that fell in Poland was a piece from a SpaceX test rocket, right? The Super Heavy. And it was pretty big. I mean, they had to put it into the back of a truck, pickup truck. It wasn't like an 18-wheeler type of situation, but it's still pretty darn big. I mean, if that stuff is coming back through the atmosphere at multiples of Mach, right? 20 plus Mach. I know Varda, for them, and they have a controlled reentry, by the way. And if you want to listen to what they have to say about what they do, that was in last week's podcast episode. But they have a controlled reentry, and they want to achieve speeds that are, Mach 25 and more to test the things that are actually on board and inside their capsule. But for these things that are uncontrolled reentry, they're going really, really fast. I mean, things that are like the size of a baseball that are going Mach 25 could explode your house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we think of the materials that go into these actual satellites and payloads and rocket fuselages, we were talking about exotic materials that are definitely designed to withstand several different magnitude of G-forces during both launch but also on-orbit maneuvers. So when these items actually break into our atmosphere, going from outside of our atmosphere to inside, there's that distinction that's at times not very well captured when people think of or identify the concept of burning up in the atmosphere. We think of ashes being the remaining effect, but to your point, because of those structural manufacturing elements that make these devices more structurally sound, we also have a higher exhibited potential for these assets to never really quite burn up. Some of the layers may burn up, but the remaining components are definitely still structurally intact and can definitely lead to concerns across several different airspaces, such as this right here. Several different European nations had a cause for concern and had to divert and actually identify and enumerate actual flight regions for that cause for concern for pilots to be mindful of as they transitioned those air corridors, doing what they normally do day in and day out.
Crazy, right? But speaking of other dangers to aircraft, this past week has seen a huge uptick in GNSS or GPS jamming and spoofing, right? I mean, there's been jamming and spoofing going on in the high north for some time now and around, the border sort of area, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Turkey. I mean, there has been some stuff going on, and also in the Mediterranean between Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, right? So we know that that's going on. That's been going on for a while. But what you've seen this week is not that, right? Why don't you tell us about that?
That is correct, and great capture. Honestly, some of the things that we've seen here, thanks to our public reporting and member and also partner identified submissions, has been that there's been an increase in that said global positioning system, global navigation system, also radio
Which
frequency
airplanes
signals.
use.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those different elements and those frequency bands have seen internal to the atmosphere type interference effects, both spoofing and jamming, but then also across the particular corridor that we've seen in the news recently, India and Pakistan. In particular, not only Pakistan through India, but also Malaysian components as well, as we start to see areas such as Laos and actual Lao-Thai border tensions rise. We've started to also see actual radio frequency interference coming from some of these contested regions. In particular, well over 100 documented plus spoofing jamming incidents from that multinational corridor. In particular, most of which also having an epicenter on the nautical area as well, across the different kind of waterways, just west of India, just west of Thailand as well.
I have to tell you that today I was at a interesting conference at CSIS that had to do with national security, and I was sitting next to Chris Kunstadter, who I like to call my insurance guy. But in addition to insurance, he actually knows how to fly, right? So he's got these apps on his phone, and I was telling him that I was going to speak to you today, and he whipped out his phone, pulled up this app, and we zeroed in on Malaysia, right? Because there's some deep water port that China's built in Malaysia somewhere. Okay. So I was telling him that what we were talking about, and we pulled it up, and there were ships, and we were taking a look, and there it was. There was this ship that was just making its way right up through the landmass of Malaysia. Right? We zeroed in on it. It was nowhere near water. In fact, it's actually a mountain range, a small one, but it's a mountain range nevertheless, that goes right up through the north middle of Malaysia. I've traveled through it on the ground. But yeah, this is happening real time right now.
Absolutely. 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 When we think about obfuscating movement, that actual element, and we've seen some of those impacts too on, oddly enough, even dating apps across national borders, where you might set up your filters to say, I only want to go ahead and meet someone from my particular nation or my region. Well, all of a sudden, the adjacent nation shows up in your feed as well. GPS impacts more than just the nautical domain. It also impacts the air domain. Also, we've seen stories of ambulances, for instance, in Ukraine going to the wrong location as a result of some of that actual spoofing and jamming type adversarial elements, obviously trying to protect themselves from drone and other kinds of airborne missile threats as well.
That's got to have some economic as well as emergency services effects. The NOTAMs can't be any fun. And I got to tell you, there's no way that I want to fly anywhere near the Hindu Kush without the pilots having access to GPS or GNSS type services. Anyhow, Hector, thank you so much for making the time to come on the podcast.
thank you as always. And thank you very much to the listeners for providing the insights that lead to these correlations and collaborative elements as well.
So now, with all that jamming and spoofing making navigation a challenge, it's not difficult to see that jamming and spoofing and even the interception of sensitive communications is a real concern, and it has been, really, since the dawn of warfare. But quantum technology, specifically the development of quantum keys, should change that. Quantum computing and computers is a near-horizon technology that can already analyze data and solve equations at blisteringly fast speeds that far exceed the most powerful traditional computers at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. Quantum keys for secure communications rely on physics, which I am not the right person to explain. But essentially, they're unbreakable. It's the reason why China is furiously pursuing the technology. IonQ is one of a handful of commercial companies that has a proven track record in developing and selling quantum computers and software. And this is where de Masi's lesser-known background comes into play. He is also a physicist who gets it. He understands the promise of quantum technology and how it can be used for space systems. And Bacchus, he sees that same vision. What Capella brings to the table is space heritage, including 4 satellites on orbit now, with 4 more slated to be launched this year. Bacchus told me the plan is to launch even more satellites to meet the demands this merging of space and quantum technologies will require to work. Here's our conversation. Hey, Frank, it's great to have you back on the podcast. And you've brought your new best friend, Niccolo. Welcome to the Downlink podcast.
Thank you, Laura. It's exciting to be here on the Downlink. Again, enjoyed our last conversation. I look forward to this one as well.
Honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So now, before we begin our discussion, it'd be great if you guys could take a moment and introduce yourselves. And Frank, as you have been a guest on the Downlink podcast before, and Capella Space has a name that is recognized in our space community, why don't you kick this off?
Thank you, Laura. Yes, I'm Frank Bacchus, the CEO for Capella Space. I've been with Capella Space for just over a year and a half, and we have some exciting announcements today. So I look forward to bringing that to you.
And for those who don't know Capella, could you give us a wee brief description of what Capella does and very specifically who it does it for? And please don't be shy. Name the countries, please.
All right. So yes, Capella Space is an Earth observation space company. We own and operate our own constellation of satellites. We also make those satellites available for our sovereign country customers. That includes the U.S. and Japan, the Ukraine, Israel, many other countries use our capabilities to monitor what's going on the planet.
And your technology can actually see through clouds and stuff like that too. So it's pretty amazing stuff, right?
Yeah, our technology, synthetic aperture radar, is used to be able to monitor the planet through adverse weather conditions, through clouds at nighttime, basically given the ability to see what's happening at any time of day or night or weather condition.
Thanks. And Niccolo, you're new to the podcast. IonQ is also new to the podcast, but I really have to admit that I have been following the company for about a year simply because I have an interest in quantum companies. So it's a real honor to have you. And like Frank, you're no stranger to the C-suite and its leadership roles, right? IonQ is not the first company you've led. You've got DMY Square Technology. You've held leadership positions with Monster Mob Group, Glue Mobile, others. But the thing is, who are you? And is this acquisition that we're about to talk about, is this your first foray into space?
So I'm a physicist originally. I went to Cambridge University undergrad and grad. Half my life has been in the fundamental science sector, and half of it's probably been in the consumer internet sector. So I appreciate all halves of the, I'd say, business, science, and commercial ecosystem. I took IonQ public with one of my SPACs 5 years ago, so I've been on the board 5 years. I actually took Planet Labs public after IonQ in 2021. And so I am a little familiar with the space sector, but I don't pretend to be an expert like Frank is. I obviously have had I think more sort of peripheral governance role on the space sector prior to this deal, but know enough to be dangerous. And we've been fortunate to have a wonderful board member at IonQ named Robert Cardillo, who used to run the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He was really instrumental in helping us see the opportunity between Capella and IonQ.
Interesting. Now, IonQ is a quantum computing company, right? The mission statement is to build the world's best quantum computers to solve the world's most complex problems. And yes, that is a quote straight from the website. Great sentiment, great statement, non-limiting. But this audience needs more, like more meat on the bone. And that protein definitely exists. Otherwise, the company could not have raised $77 million from the likes of Google Ventures or New Enterprise Associates, Samsung, Amazon, and Mubadala, which is also interesting, an Emirati sovereign wealth fund headquartered in Abu Dhabi. So really, really, truly, what does IonQ do and where, and how many people do you have working on it, Niccolo?
All good questions. Yeah, so we've raised well over $1 billion in our lifetime.
Huge!
It's just been $1 billion
Huge.
since I've been involved. And when I met the company, we had probably 35 or 40 people, 5 or 6 years ago. Today, we're probably at 600 or 650 before Frank gets involved. With Capella, it's probably 850 or so. We were born on the University of Maryland campus. Our founder 30 years ago was a guy named Dr. Chris Monroe, and we set out to build obviously the first quantum computers, which we did, and then obviously the most powerful ones with the most extensible customer ecosystem. We've spent time learning from and working with the 3-letter government agency space, but we know there's more we can do, which is one of the reasons why we're excited about merging with Capella. We've also expanded into the quantum networking space, which is a big piece of our story. And also the other piece of the rationale with Frank is we're doing quantum networking on the ground and quantum key distribution and quantum security. Ironically, as quantum computers become more powerful, they threaten encryption that is the basis of really all modern civilization, I would say, right? Between keeping banking information safe, communication safe, the battlefield safe, making sure that you can conduct e-commerce. And all this relies on modern day RSA encryption. And so if quantum computers get closer to cracking that, you have to ask yourself what we do about that. And what you do about that is quantum security. It's quantum encryption. The most vulnerable piece of the modern communications landscape, we believe, is ground to satellite, satellite to satellite, and satellite to ground. And with Capella, IonQ is going to be a leader in solving that so that we can do quantum security on the ground, quantum key distribution on the ground, and up in the heavens, as I like to say. And we also like to say that we're building, honestly, the future of the quantum internet at IonQ. If the computers are the nodes, our network on the ground and the sky, and our repeaters will allow that network and security to extend. I think the reality is this is going to come a lot faster than people think. I can't remember if it was Einstein or someone else who said we always overestimate what we do in a year, underestimate what happens in 10 years. I very much felt that way at IonQ's IPO in 2020. I think Capella got going, in 2020 in a lot of ways as a commercial organization. And so we're kind of halfway to that 10-year mark, and we've all made exponential progress. I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to have even more exponential progress. Our quantum computers are advancing by a factor of 2 every time we add a qubit. So it's not like Moore's Law where every 18 months you double. Ours doubles every month, every week sometimes. And so in 18 months, we're going to be increasing our AQ36, AQ64 system by a factor of 240 million times more power, right? And so it really is game-changing quickly when you can start to do useful things for people in data processing, data modeling, quantum AI. 10, 15% today with AQ36 could be a really astronomically large number next year with our new systems. And so I think Frank, what I love about Frank is that he's got all the national security expertise, all the space expertise, but he also sees the full vision of what IonQ can do to help grow Capella. And I really want to give Frank as much airtime as possible to talk about how we're going to do that, because I think it is we're here to help grow his business. We're here to pioneer together and make markets and make frontier markets. But it starts with obviously this kind of more narrow application of quantum networking and quantum computing for Capella, and then it ends hopefully many years and decades from now when Frank and I have put a big dent in the universe together. Is what I'd say.
Well, we definitely have a lot to look forward to, but let's dive into that just a wee bit more, right? Because not everybody really understands the security that quantum can provide to communications. And if I'm not mistaken, this is secured by quantum keys. That these keys are made up in such a way that if you do not have the key on the other side, or if somebody tries to muck with it, spoof it, change it, get into it, that those that are the holder of the keys actually are alerted to this fact, and they then know that that communication may not actually be as secure as they think, right?
100%. Well said, right? It's like, it's the old thing about, if you measure a quantum state, you disrupt it. And you can tell with quantum distribution if someone is measuring on the line, basically.
Mm.
So unlike classical security, where the joke always is there's two types of cybersecurity issues: the ones you know about and the people in your system you don't know about. With QKD, you always know if someone's trying.
That's very, very important. And there's another thing that I also want to key in on. You used the word pioneer or pioneering, right? You want to get to that edge. And I wanted to know, like, how far does it actually go? Because the communications that you guys are talking about are satellite to satellite as well as satellite to the ground. But I'd hope that you're not limiting yourself and that you're thinking a bit further out to, let's say, communications for lunar habitats, right? It would be pretty key to have secure communications in, a pretty austere and dangerous environment. Or, how about asteroid mining operations? And as you said, I mean, maybe the future isn't as far off as everyone thinks. But yeah, I mean, do you see this going out beyond, let's say, the Earth orbits?
I mean, look, I don't want to get too far over our skis here. We are a public company, but I think that the willingness to dare to dream is obviously there. I'm not sure I'm going to put a quarterly projection on that, to be honest. But yes, our dream is, can we do data centers of quantum computers in space? Can we do quantum key distribution, from ground upwards? I'm still living on the Earth personally, so I'm not personally planning on moving to the moon or an asteroid or Mars for that matter. But, yes, I mean, look, I think the next decade or two, I mean, our lifetimes are going to see much more going on, supported from the heavens, as well as, in some cases driven from the heavens, right? And I think that the fact that the U.S. created a space force, Donald Trump's first term, has proven correct and prescient. And the reality is we're going to see just continued investment, right? Capella and IonQ, we think, are going to be a bedrock of the U.S. national security infrastructure. We also think it's going to be a bedrock of the U.S. National economic security. And the reality is, if we don't grow in this field of endeavor and we don't lead in this field of endeavor, a lot of not good things happen to our competitiveness, as well as happen to our ability to fundamentally, project force and also, of course, retain the ability to surprise strategically, as they say, right? To prevent and cause, as DARPA likes to say, right? And I think what IonQ does and what Capella does are kind of a match made in heaven on those fronts.
So it's clear that security is the theme specifically to secure communications. That's really at the heart of this all-stock acquisition deal. It's been valued by my colleagues to be roughly at $318 million. But if Capella really wanted to get into quantum or even find another kind of exit, there were other options, Frank. I know someone who was very interested in acquiring Capella, and, having governments and intelligence and defense customers is, kind of makes you comely. So, Frank, why this deal? What does this deal mean for Capella's venture capital investors? What's next for them? What's next for Capella in this construct?
Well, in this construct, I mean, what this represents for Capella is access to public markets and the ability to fund these, incredibly large opportunities for Capella. Capella is moving beyond just SAR. Synthetic aperture radar is one phenomenology, but when we're trying to monitor the planet, our ability to look at the planet with multiple phenomenologies is an important component as well. But once you've gathered that data with your sensors on orbit, you need to move that data. You need to move it securely. You need to be able to task those sensors on orbit securely. What IonQ represents in this environment, one is the public market from a funding perspective to be able to do this work without immediate dependency on, government contracts as an example. We want to be able to drive our own timelines in achieving these goals, but we also need the ability to capture that data, transport that data securely, communicate effectively and securely with our tasking, and be able to do this for sovereign countries with an S, not just the United States. We're looking at being able to provide this kind of capability where, many people in the industry understand the concept of a virtual private network. But trust me, when you add quantum technology to a virtual private network, you really are creating a private network. You're creating a world where if somebody is listening, if somebody's trying to break into that network, and you have the ability to really and truly create a sovereign network, a sovereign environment. And that's what our customers are demanding, that we move toward that day when we can protect the infrastructure that we're putting in place. So yes,
I think that
about being on orbit. Yeah, Niccolo, yes.
I was saying that's fantastically well said, Frank. And I think from IonQ's perspective, what we are excited about here is the full multimodal signal capabilities, right? So we view Capella as a platform. They're not only good at space, they've got great software. They're not only good at SAR, but they can do a lot more than that. And so we sort of see the full vision of the full roadmap, and we're here very much to support Frank in realizing that.
And also, you two are C-suite alphas, right? I know Frank and Niccolo. I've seen your, C-suite rap sheet, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I've gleaned over your first quarter earnings report. Niccolo, you've been very, very busy in your first 80 days at the helm. You've closed at least one deal, and I can't remember the name of the company, and I'm very sorry about that, but it was a fast deal. I think you announced the deal sometime in February, and I think it closed like 2 weeks ago or sometime in the last few days,
Yeah,
right?
oh, that's right.
And then, on the same day as the Capella announcement, you also announced that you're acquiring LightSync Technologies, and it's got patents for quantum repeaters, which is really interesting because it means that you'd be able to send a quantum key across greater distances. I'm assuming that the key degrades after crossing a certain number of kilometers, but don't quote me on it because, unlike you, Niccolo, I am not a physicist. But hey, guys, what are you building?
I think you were spot on. We're trying to build the future of quantum computing, the future of quantum networking, the future of the quantum internet. And yeah, we've been busy. We closed IDQ in Geneva in April. We announced LightSync the same time as Capella. And we'll continue to be active in the space to ensure that, frankly, I'd like to say, we're in it to win it.
And which is great. And I have to say that Niccolo just left us. But for those who are the customers for these new in-house capabilities, what's the value proposition? Can you even make a revenue prediction, say, for a year from now, what it would be?
Well, to give you an idea, Laura, on that perspective, we have a very large pipeline of opportunities that include many different sovereign countries. And the differentiators that they're looking for are primarily focused around 3 areas: latency, security, and capacity. And what this gives us the opportunity to do is address each one of those in a way that is distinctly differentiating from every other space company. The ability to address latency, build optical networks that can be trusted, can cross thousands of kilometers, and be able to deliver the data to a processing center that has the ability to process that data at a speed that is unheard of in today's computing environment. And so the turnaround time, the full latency from tasking to delivering an intelligence capability, a piece of information for somebody to act on, being able to shorten that time frame from days to hours to minutes to maybe even seconds in the future. Those are the things that our customers are looking for. And traditional space architectures weren't going to get there. And we're seeing that challenge across the space environment. Latency in communications is a massive challenge and continues to be a challenge.
Well, it's going to be a huge challenge if you think about the whole Golden Dome project, right? I mean, you've got 150 seconds from, flash to bang. And I mean that in the sense of from the point of where the launch doors open on an intercontinental ballistic missile for it to actually get up into the atmosphere and be in the glide phase.
Yes.
Because before it gets to that glide phase, you can actually really pick it up because it's got a fire on the end, right? So it's hot and sensors can really see it. But you've got really about 150 seconds to make a decision, identify it, see it, analyze it. What does this mean? And make a decision. And you kind of hope that that signal or signals wouldn't be messed with, would be secure, wouldn't be spoofed, wouldn't be tampered with.
Exactly. And if they were, you'd want to know. And that's one of the key aspects of this. And one of the challenges that we have in security today is when is the adversary in your network? If you can know that without question, it changes your entire approach to the situation. Another important component when you're talking about, let's say, Golden Dome, and you're trying to track, a missile in glide phase, right? That missile in many cases is still transmitting signals. So you may have lost its infrared signature, but you may be able to continue tracking that missile with RF or optical or radar. And so the key to this is being able to do a multi-phenomenology architecture that allows immediate and secure communication between the phenomenologies so that you can put the picture together in real time and be able to then react to that situation. That's really what we're talking about. And that has never been done before.
Value? Dollars and cents? How much would this service cost?
From a dollars and cents perspective, that's one of the very interesting aspects of Capella and what we're doing. We've been able to take school bus size national technical means satellites that used to cost hundreds of millions to billions of dollars and now deploy those same technologies in a proliferated LEO constellation where the cost per satellite is in the tens of millions. And when you're doing them in volume, you might be able to get into single millions of dollars per satellite. This is a completely different environment now that once you can secure it and you can operate in timelines that are relevant to the mission, all of a sudden a proliferated LEO architecture, which our agencies have been talking about for years now, can become a reality.
And those savings are passed on to the customer?
Those savings absolutely are. That's the reason why there's so many more sovereign countries interested. They can afford this technology. Today, Capella is selling our satellites and satellite constellations to sovereign countries at price points that allow them to compete, allow them to deploy this technology, where in the past, when the satellites were hundreds of millions to $1 billion per satellite, it was not an option for them to use space.
Whoa, look, Niccolo's back.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Good. Now, to just sort of wrap this all up and put a bow on it, if there was something you wanted to say to your shareholders, whether, Frank, it's the private, investors that you have right now, which are soon going to be joining a greater community, or the public shareholders that have bought stock in IonQ, what have they actually signed up for?
And I'll jump in quick and then let Niccolo kind of finish out his perspective of that answer. What they've signed up for in IonQ and now with Capella and the other acquisitions that IonQ is doing is they have signed up for a world where we're going to have an opportunity to make generational change, right? I've been in the space industry now for over 40 years, and I have never seen the pace of change that IonQ can represent to the space industry. And it is time. We can move beyond theoretical physics with quantum and get into operational deployment. So we're truly talking about a multi-generational change right in front of us to be able to do things that we've never done before and secure them in ways that we never even imagined. So to me, that's what people are buying into. Niccolo, your perspective.
I think it's well said. I mean, look, I always remind myself, as both a physicist and a student of history, that some of the most exciting things ever happened in human technological progress and advancement lie at the intersection of industries and sectors. And I think Frank and I have just created a new intersection, right? So this is the first quantum space play that exists, certainly in the public markets, and I would argue anywhere, at least in the commercial sector. It is the first ground and space QKD, quantum key distribution, and quantum networking play. It is the best path, given their payload technologies and capabilities and expertise at Capella, of thinking about quantum computing both on the ground and someday in space, as well as, of course, a fantastic example, as Frank said, of delivering what we would call, narrow quantum advantage for specific applications to make a big difference to the trajectory of Capella's business, to SAR, to partnerships and signals intelligence, with hopefully, a number of growing three-letter agencies at this government, and of course other friendly governments that we were permitted to work with. And so I think this will be a historic deal as you look at the next, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year, 10 year. What I've noticed that I will say here on the record is everyone tends to copy us at IonQ. we were the first public quantum company. We were the first company that pushed into the commercial space, the first company that pushed into the networking space, the first person that pushed into what I call the space. and I think that the holistic approach we're taking means that our ecosystem at IonQ is going to be unprecedented, unparalleled in its breadth and depth, unprecedented, unparalleled in its ability to deliver global, local solutions for both, the Fortune 500 and, government defense and intelligence partners. So I think, I always thank our shareholders for their support and our customers for their trust in us. It's a big responsibility. It's one that we, of course, welcome, but at the same time realize is a significant and serious one, particularly when we're in industries like Frank and mine, where, it does matter to national security every day. It does matter to our economy's prospects, and it does matter to ultimately our country's place in the global world order.
Niccolo, Frank, thank you both so much for your time and for coming on the Downlink podcast.
Thank you,
All
Laura.
our pleasure.
Appreciate your time.
Look forward to coming back. Thank you so much for the conversation. Really enjoyed it. Take care.
Laura, thank you for the opportunity to be on the Downlink again. And I look forward to our next opportunity to talk.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavis Ships with Chris Cavis and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.